which means that Thanksgiving is a holiday that is made to be a day where you're just supposed to be thankful for all the things you have. So how did Thanksgiving start? Just like now, people in the past would travel from the place they were born to live in other areas. However, back then, there were no airports or houses or established living areas. So people would have to sail across to a new land and then live off of the natural plants that grew in that new land. Specifically, in 1620, a ship from England landed in North America, and they were trying to live off of the plants that grew in the land, but they didn't know how to farm, so they couldn't get enough food to live through the winter. They were a group of Native Americans that already lived on that land, so they gave them food and taught the people from England how to farm. So when the plants finally grew, the English people and the Native Americans celebrated this together by eating a meal together. So this became an annual tradition, and in 1863, it was declared an official holiday. So now it's a holiday where everyone's supposed to get together and be thankful for the fact they have food and stuff. So when do we celebrate Thanksgiving? I'm not sure if you celebrate Thanksgiving where you live. It's most commonly celebrated in the United States, where it's the fourth Thursday of every November. And different countries celebrate it, and they're celebrated in different times, depending on those countries. On the next slide, we'll explain what the specific traditions are for celebrating Thanksgiving. So if you want to, you can try them. They're pretty fun. So the next slide. So the first thing that a lot of people do is travel, because one of the things that often you're supposed to be thankful for is your family. And so a lot of times people don't live in the same place as their family. And so they'll travel back to where their family is so they can be with their parents and with their kids. And so that's why during Thanksgiving, a lot of the times airports and stuff will be very crowded. The second tradition for Thanksgiving is the feast, because this is a very important tradition because it's what initially started Thanksgiving. So there are traditional foods that people generally eat that include turkey, potatoes, and cranberry sauce. And normally people will just eat it together with their family, and then people will often serve pie for dessert at the end of the meal. So third tradition is the wishbone. So turkey is one of the foods that people eat in Thanksgiving, and there's a bone that is attached to the breast meat of a turkey's chest. And so after the meat has been removed, and the wishbone becomes very brittle, and so it will break easily. So if you pull on it, then it will break. And so it's a fun tradition to have two people each hold one end of the bone and then pull it. And then once it breaks, whoever has the larger piece gets to make a wish, and then their wish will supposedly come true. And then the last thing that we do on Thanksgiving is called the turkey pardon. So every single year at Thanksgiving, the President of the United States, because this holiday is most commonly celebrated in the US, they receive a gift of 2 live turkeys. And then the president pardons the turkey and lets them live on a farm. So it's like they get to live instead of being cooked into a meal like a lot of other turkeys. That's the last tradition. As you probably realized, a majority of the traditions center around food, that being turkey or bones or pies and stuff. So in the next slide, we'll just give some specific examples of foods and that we eat during Thanksgiving. So on the next slide, there's just a list of foods. The most traditional Thanksgiving food is include roast turkey, turkey stuffing, mashed potatoes, gravy, beans, corns, etc. Turkey is the most well-known dish because a lot of the things we do in Thanksgiving have to do with turkey. As we've said already, that includes the wishbone and stuff. Other dishes also include pumpkin pie, Brussels sprouts, and there are lots of foods that are already made that are put in stores. So if you don't have time to cook, you can just go buy the foods from the stores. And these include pumpkin pie, mashed potatoes, or turkey. So It's very important during Thanksgiving that you and your family sit around at a table and then you talk about how you're thankful for being with each other and you're thankful for having all this food. So that's why food is very important. Okay.
Okay, so I'll be talking about the food with their story and the meaning of that story. So the celebration took place or took in 1621. The turkey is served because the turkey is large enough to serve an entire family. The turkey was also the first meal that they ever eaten, and all other components were added through time. What's this important significance of Thanksgiving? Well, it celebrates the harvest and other blessings of the past year. It teaches people to be thankful to each other, and Americans really generally believe that their Thanksgiving is modeled on a 1621 harvest feast, which was shared by the English colonists, which were the Pilgrims of Plymouth, and the Wampanoag people, which were Indians. The food is the food is used for vehicular travel, and families come from all different places to celebrate together. Some ways you can show gratitude on Thanksgiving are to volunteer and help others out. So, like for example, you can help your family members out, you can help your friends out, and you can even help your neighbors out. You can also invite people you know to hang out with you, such as your friends and just basically anybody you want. You can also make an extra meal for everyone. So maybe like cook one of the foods that y'all mentioned earlier for your family or for your friends. You can share everyone your favorite memories. You can also express and help others express gratitude. Seasonal changes. Some of the seasonal changes that come with Thanksgiving are different than most other holidays. For Halloween or Christmas, people usually decorate their houses with lights, and for Halloween, they would decorate it with different ghosts or spiders or something. But with Thanksgiving, it's they focus more on the food. So you would see more you will see more people put like pumpkins near their house because they believe pumpkins are very important. And there are also many other activities to do, such as corn mazes, pumpkin patches, and hay rides. And here's our works cited. And yeah, thanks for listening.
Okay, thank you, Pop Culture Group. And for history, to everyone.
Yes, history will begin in 2 minutes.
Okay, so everyone can take a small break.
Okay, I think we'll start history now. Okay, hello everybody and welcome to this week of history. This week we're going to do an intro to medieval Europe. And here are our lesson plans. Check out our YouTube channel if you're interested in getting some videos of the previous lessons. And here's a brief timeline of medieval Europe. Today we are going to begin by introducing the earlier periods. We will start by finishing the stories from last unit, which we didn't go to last class.
Okay, so remember last time we left off with some Three Kingdom story. So this is the third one. Empty city trick. During the period of the Three Kingdoms of China, Zhuge Liang, the prime minister of Shu, tried to conquer the northern country of Wei. During a battle, Sima Yi, the general of the Wei's troops tried to kill Zhuge Liang by bringing 150,000 troops on the battle against the Shu's territory of Xi City. After Zhuge Liang and his troops heard about it, his troops became frightened and thought they were all doomed. Since they only had 5,000 soldiers and half was out transporting food for the army. But Zhuge Liang told them to not panic and made out a plan against Sima Yi. Firstly, he told the troops to open the gates of the city. Secondly, he told some of his soldiers to pretend they are normal civilians, cleaning out the dirt in front of the city. Lastly, he ordered his troops to not make a sound when Sima Yi arrived to the city. Zhuge Liang went high up to the top of the city wall and started playing the Chinese instrument of guzheng. Sima Yi thought this was weird and thought it would be dangerous to go in the city because he thought there might be some troop waiting to attack them in the city and it was a trick of Zhuge Liang. So he left the city and later on, when he came back to the city again, the civilians told him about how he was tricked by Zhuge Liang. He felt regret for not attacking the city. And the fourth story is also a famous story. It's called "Scrape Bone to Cure Poison." So this is a story from Three Kingdoms. Guan Yu was hit by a poisonous arrow. So if you remember him, he's one of the best friends of the king of Shu, Liu Bei. So he was hit by a poisonous arrow in the right arm while attacking the Fancheng city. When his men took the arrowhead out, they found that the poison had already seeped into the bone. So this means that the poison has already go deep into the bone, and it cannot be simply removed. So they persuaded him to go to Jingzhou for treatment. Um, Determined to take over Fencheng City, Guan Yu refused to retreat. So retreat means to go back and not to attack. And seeing Guan's wound getting worse day by day, they sent out scouts to look for famous doctors. And one day, a man named Hua Tuo came by boat to the camp to cure Guan Yu. I'm afraid that you'll be scared. So I suggest that we set up a post with a loop to tie down your arms with rope. Then when your eyes are covered, I'll start the operation. Guan laughingly said, that's unnecessary. Next slide, please. Then he gave orders to hold the dinner for Hua Tuo. After drinking several glasses of wine, Guan started to play chess. At the same time, he reached out his right arm to Hua Tuo and said, "It's at your disposal. I have no fear." So this means that Guan refused to tie a rope to kind of block the pain from his arm. So he directly faced the pain. And Hua cut the skin and flesh open and scraped the bone with a scalpel. Everyone present covered their eyes while Guan continued drinking and playing chess. In a few moments, the blood filled a basin. When the poison was scraped off from the bone, Guan stood up and smilingly said, "Now my arm can move freely just like before, Mr. Hua Tuo. You're a magic doctor." Hua said, "Since I started medical practice, I haven't seen anyone like you. You're a magic general." So this story shows the great, shows Guan is really brave. Since he faces the pain of scraping his bone directly. Um, yeah.
So now moving to some medieval stories. The first one we're gonna go over is Robin Hood. You may have heard of him, or you may not have, but he's one of the most famous figures from the Middle Ages. And he was a skilled archer, so shooting arrows, and a swordsman. But he was also a criminal that fought against the authority. And what he did was he robbed money and food from the rich to give to the poor, which made him very popular among the people because most people were poor and they didn't like the rich because that they had everything. And so we're not exactly sure if this Robin Hood was actually a real person or just a made up story, but there was a series of poems dating from the 14th century that describes his heroic and dangerous journeys. And his main enemy was this person called the Sheriff of Nottingham. Nottingham was a place. And the sheriff was a tyrant or a very cruel person that treated people badly. And to the rich, this Robin Hood was hated, but to the poor people, he was a hero and a leader that people looked up to. Next slide, please. So whether or not he was real, Robin Hood made a huge impact on society in the past and today. There were a lot of poems and plays written on him, and people later began putting their own spin onto what Robin Hood is like. Later, there were also a lot of books, movies, and TV shows made on Robin Hood, with one that just came out in 2018. And today, there's also a Robin Hood effect in economics, which basically says like we're bringing wealth from the rich to the poor, so that wealth is more equally distributed among the people. And this effect in economy is adapted from the actual Robin Hood in the Middle Ages, who helped the poor by stealing from the rich.
The plague of Justinian. During Emperor Justinian, a very big plague happened, killing over millions of citizens. And this disease originated in China and India and was spread from trade routes through Africa to Constantinople, which is a major city for the Ottoman Empire, but at this time it's still under the Byzantine Empire's rule. The black rats on the grain ships were the main source of transmission. Warehouses on the ship were the best places for rats to breed and duplicate. And these grain ships are very common in Africa because it was the main source of trade. These rats love eating the grains and other food containers stored on the ship. During the summer in Italy, it was unusually cold weather including multiple snow incidents and below freezing temperatures. This caused many citizens to become very sick and leading to many food shortages. With the invasion of rats, many citizens were suffering from delusions, nightmares, fevers, and swellings in their groin, armpits, and behind their ears.
So the last story from the Middle Ages we're going to cover is King Arthur. King Arthur is another famous mythological figure, which means that he is fake, he is made up, that originated in the 5th and 6th century in the United Kingdoms. So this King Arthur was a warrior who helped Britain, which is in United Kingdoms, defend against another place called the Saxon soldiers. And many historians debate on whether this King Arthur was a real person or not, because there wasn't a lot of evidence on whether he was real. But basically, his father was this other king called King Uther Pendragon. And when he died, people fought for the throne to become the next king. Merlin, a magician at the time, set the king's sword called the Excalibur into a stone. And basically, he said, whoever can pull this sword from the stone will be the next king of England. And so everyone tried to pull the Excalibur, the sword, from the stone, but no one could do it. But Arthur, who was Pendragon's real son, was able to take the sword out of the stone. So he was eventually named king. And basically, he was known for helping Britain fight against the Saxons, and he won. But later, there was a civil war inside Britain, inside his court, and he was eventually killed at this battle called Camlet.
I'm going to talk about the Byzantine Empire. As Western Europe witnessed the formation of new kingdoms, the Eastern Roman Empire remained intact and experienced an economic revival that lasted into the early 7th century. There were few invasions of the eastern section of the empire. Most occurred in the Balkans. Peace with the Sasanian Empire, the traditional enemy of Rome, lasting throughout most of the 5th century. The Eastern Empire was marked by closer relations between the political state and the Christian church, with doctrinal matters assuming an importance in Eastern politicals that they did not have in Western Europe. An additional problem to face the empire came as a result of the involvement of Emperor Maurice. He lives from 582 to 602. In Brazilian politics, when he intervened in the succession dispute. This led to a period of peace, but when Maurice was overthrown, the Persians invaded, and during the region of Emperor Heraclius controlled large chunks of the empire, including Egypt, Syria, and Anatolia until Heraclius successfully counterattacked. In 628, the empire secured a peace treaty and recovered all of its lost territories.
So there's a saying that the Middle Ages is a disastrous era in European history. Although this statement has long been outdated and highly unreliable in today's academic circles, it is still widely accepted not only in Europe but also almost worldwide. As a result, the Middle Age has another name, Dark Ages. So now we're gonna briefly introduce to the Middle Age. So the Middle Ages extends from the 5th century AD to 15th century AD. So it is a very long time. It's almost 1,000 years, and it begins with the fall of Western Roman Empire, which is 476, and ends with the fall of Eastern Roman Empire. It's also known as Byzantine, and which is at 1453, and it's a period when civilization developed relatively slowly, and no strong central government that rules the land, and and the feudal separatism brought frequent wars. So this means that like the feudal kingdoms frequently launch wars to separate the lands and conquer the lands. And the Catholic Church imprisons human thought. So the middle,
Oh, you can.
Yeah, so the Middle Ages is the middle period of the three traditional divisions of European history, which include which precedes the modern period. All right, since the Middle Age is kind of similar, or people think they are kind of similar to the Spring, Autumn, and Warring States period, I'll go through and compare the exact differences. So in the Middle Ages, you have feudal separation. And generally, the ideology was Christian, specifically controlled by the Catholic Church. Technology was resisted by the Catholic Church since it challenged the authenticity of the ideology of Christ. The economy system was known as the manorial system, in which servants and slaves worked in a huge house in the land of their owner. They never left the land of their owner and lived and died by that land. The hierarchy is pyramidal, which is similar to the Spring, Autumn, Warring States period. There was limited power and duty, and a vassal of my appendage is not my appendage. As for the Spring, Autumn, Warring States period, you have feudal separation, which is true. But you also had in Warring States periods a merger, which is basically when the Qin unified all of China. As for ideology, there were different thoughts. You had legalism, you had Confucianism, you had Taoism. Technology was very, very well researched by need of warfare. However, there was an economy system that's different, known as the Jintian system, where each family is a unit, works on land that doesn't belong to them, and needs to submit certain amounts of their crops to the land's owner. Now, hierarchy, again, is pyramidal. They have limited power, but nearly unlimited duty, and it's very, very centralized.
Okay, the Catholic Church. After the fall of the Western Roman Empire, no single state or government united Europe. So instead, the Catholic Church became the most powerful institution of the medieval period. Kings, queens, and other leaders derived much of their power from their alliances with and protection of the church. And ordinary people across Europe had to give 10% of their earnings each year to the church. The church was mostly exempt from taxation, which helped it amass a great deal of money and power.
So here's the anecdote happened during the Dark Age. So the first is trial by ordeal, means the trial by God. So after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, the countries established by the Germanic barbarians stood on the ruins of the empire. And the original detailed and rigorous Roman legal system collapsed. So from this we can know the legal system became very chaotic, and when dealing with ordinary people's disputes, whether they're guilty or not should be judged by the divine judgment. So it's basically decided at least under the name of God. So the divine judgment was supervised by a priest, and the accused was asked to hold a hot iron rod in his hand or to take out a stone from boiling water. If the accused person's hand heal after these activities, he or she is innocent. If they don't heal, they are guilty. So there are also similar methods, such as the accused person binded with a rope and thrown into a pool. the water in the pool was given grace by the priest. If the accused person sinks to the bottom of the pool, he is accepted by the holy water and is acquitted. And if a man floated, he is guilty. So from this we can know this is quite unreasonable, since if you sink to the bottom, you are died. If you are considered guilty, you are also died. Yeah. So another anecdote is the church bride. So before the Gregorian reform, which who was the so this guy was the Pope. This guy was the Pope at that time, and he made all the he basically made the Catholic Church gained authority and formed a church hierarchy. So for many kings, selling church offices was just a copy of the land fief. The new officials who took over had to pay taxes similar to inheritance fees. For some priests who aim to get promoted and become rich, the way of buying and selling officials is really good. Menacing, the archbishop of Rheims, so which means a very sophisticated position in the Catholic Church. So he spent a lot of money to buy this official, and then relied on it to make money. It is said that he said this: "It's great to be an archbishop, Lance, if you don't have to sing mass," showing that the essence of the religion has already become a tool for ruling.
Okay, the Crusades were a series of religious wars between Christians and Muslims that started after the Catholic Church authorized military expeditions to expel Muslims from the Holy Land. In all, there were 8 major crusade expeditions occurring between 1096 and 1291, and it ended when the last crusader city, Acre, fell to Muslim Mamluks. Although the Crusades ultimately resulted in defeat for the Europeans, it successfully extended the reach of Christianity and led to an increase in wealth and power for the Catholic Church. After the Crusades, there was a heightened interest in travel and learning throughout Europe, which paved the way for the Renaissance.
The positive side of church, there are many factors actually, and it's not all bad. For example, the church helped to promote culture. All monasteries, large and small, keep a considerable number of books, among which Benedictine is the most represented. The Mendicant Recess also had a large collection of books, which were constantly copied and expanded. And even today, if you were to go to the church, to Vatican City, you would see that there are many books that are kept in their library. Also, the church also helped to increase education. Although the level of education was not very high, they still taught the traditional 7 arts education and helped to create early universities. The ideology was that of Aristotle from Greek philosophy. Although scholasticism was cumbersome, it made the formal logic more refined and prepared for development of later thought. And this difference between nominalism and realism preserved and developed the fire of the struggle between both schools of thought. And finally, the religious music, ancient tunes were preserved. A lot of the music we have today, like O Fortuna, started out as religious music, and new music theories and methods developed slowly but firmly. Architectural techniques such as the Gothic style were preserved, and a lot of the new architectural art and technology of this time is reflected in religious architecture. If you've ever been in Notre Dame, although it burned down quite recently, Notre Dame is religious architecture, the Gothic style, and it emphasizes intense emotion and profound experience.
The federal system. Federal system first emerged in France in the 10th century and spread to other lands in the 11th century. Federal derives from the word fief, which defined as an area of land built under certain conditions. Person who granted a fief to another person is that person's lord, and the person who receives the fief is that person's vassal. Person who receives the fief, so the vassal will stay loyal and serve to their landlord as an exchange. Vassals, they are expected to perform various duties in exchange for their own fiefs, their own land. So here's a social hierarchy during the feudalism. Starting from the highest social rank. So for the king or the emperor, they belong to the top layer of the social rank in terms of wealth and power. During European feudalism, they would grant fief to great lords in exchange for loyalty, resources, and services such as military aid and taxes. However, the kingdom might directly divide its fiefs for the vassals. Under the king, the emperor, it comes to great lords. They are mad knights. Their title nobles such as the duke, the highest title of nobility. Under it comes counts and barons, which belongs to the second layer. They are vassals to the king, responsible for land management, and their nobility are hereditary as long as the next generation pledge fealty to their lord. Among the three title nobles, duke owns the highest title of nobility. They're responsible for governing the duchies, which means duke's land granted from the king. They also possess multiple manors that have serfs working for the land. The duke could grant lands to the count, which is called county. The count could also grant lands to the barons. However, magnates could also govern territory, which is directly subdivided by the kingdom. In many parts of Europe, there are rulers in their own right, governing duchies and counties as semi-autonomous prince. Lords are surrounded by large retainings of followers, comprised of armies of knights, domestic servants, retainers, and men-at-arms. The lord's numerous manors were supervised by called bailiffs or stewards, and their complex affairs were supervised by a staff of household officials and clerks. So for knights and gentry, they belonged to the lower part of aristocracy who held only a small part of fief. They served as the great lords, retained, fighting for his battle and living as members of his household. And at last it comes to peasants. They form the vast majority of population in medieval Europe. They rule over the duke's manor.
Yeah, so the history of medieval Europe is actually pretty complicated. So in the 14th century AD, Germanic peoples began crossing the frontiers of the Roman Empire because of the Huns. And this movement of Germanic peoples contributed to the fall of the Roman Empire. And with the fall of the Roman Empire, you had more and more Romanization, where German tribes basically adopted various Roman traditions, including Christianity, creating a syncretic religion that was both pagan and Christian at the same time. And the union of Germanic traditions and Roman religion and culture led to the emergence of the civilization of the Middle Ages. And to the left, actually, you can see the Cathedral of Notre Dame in France, which is, again, an example of Gothic architecture, which is an example of the works of art that they created. The Middle Ages are about 1,000 years. They lasted from the year 500 AD to about 1500 AD. And even though there's like this long time period, it's still very hard to tell exactly when the Middle Ages began. Generally, the date that is given is 476 AD, when Odoacer defeated the Roman general Orestes and overthrew Romulus Augustulus, which ended the Western Roman Empire, although the Byzantine Empire, the eastern part, survived for another about 1,000 years. Others historians would give the year 410, when Alaric, king of the Visigoths, sacked Rome. Still others would say that the ancient world lasted until 750 or 1000. So it's hard to say exactly when the Middle Ages ended, or even when they began. But historians will variously say that the Middle Ages ended with the fall of Constantinople in 1453, or with the European discovery of America, which was in 1492. Or, and this is rare though, the coming of the French Revolution, which was in the 1700s. Now, the Middle Ages was first defined as a historical period in the 15th century by scholars who saw their own time as a time of great cultural progress. So many people tend to say that the Middle Age long period of ignorance and superstition. However, in a modern day, historians have taken a more objective look at the Middle Ages, and they actually argue that there were many new forms of political, social, cultural, and economic organization. For example, the countries that developed in that time laid the foundations for the nation states of the modern period, such as France, England, Germany, Italy. People also began to consider Europe as a distinct cultural unit instead of mere barbarians. And of course, the Roman Catholic Church expanded its influence to a significant part of the world. And of course, population began to grow greatly, agricultural and trade flourished, and cities expanded. Medieval Europe would give the world the first universities and many, many cathedrals. Thank you for listening, everyone. And that is the end of our presentation. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask them, and we'll respond to them as quickly as we can. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, history group. And now, yeah, feel free to type any question you have in the chat. And our last lesson is physics by Naomi.
Is my mic okay? Is it like echoey, or should I wear like headphones?
It's fine for me. I don't hear any echo.
Okay.
It's good.
Okay. Hold on, give me a second. All right. Oh, wait, is this the right page? Nah. Okay, so hello everyone. I am Naomi. I am the lone member of Team Physics, and this is week 3. And we're going to be going over basic vector math. It's basically going over what we did last time and a little bit more. So first, we're going to go over like the basics of what we did and just like kind of like review. So I'm just going to go over this. So a vector is a property that has both a magnitude and a direction. So in case that you forgot what those were, a magnitude is like the size, the extent of something, like a bike moving or bicycling like 5 miles per hour. You would say the 5 miles per hour is the magnitude. And a direction is like, well, you know what direction is, right? Like north, east, south, west. So if it was a bicycle moving 5 miles per hour north, the direction would be the bicycle moving north. So the vector is usually drawn as an arrow with a tail and a head. As you can see in this image we used last time, this is the tail and this is the head, usually shown by like, you know, this arrow thing. And the length of the vector represents its magnitude. So we usually try to draw vectors by scaling it according to whatever else we're measuring it with. So a little more, vectors are written using a letter and a boldface type. So kind of like this, we have an A, this is vector A, and there's a little arrow going to the right on it, and that's what signifies that it's a vector. So, but if we were just talking about the magnitude of the vector and we weren't specifically looking for what direction it is, we would put it inside parallel lines, like as you see here. Okay, so adding vectors. So surprise, surprise, vectors can be added together in order to find the resultant of both vectors. So as you see here, we're adding together a vector that's going to the right of 3, and we're adding together another vector that's going to the right, that's 7. And we can add them together since they're going in the same direction, and they're both positive, and we get 10. All right, so both the direction and the magnitudes are combined when we add vectors, right? So I just went over an example, but yeah, when you go to the right, okay, so just to keep something in mind, it's that in general, when we describe like horizontal motion, when there's motion going to the right, it's usually considered to be going positive, and when we're going to the left, it's negative. So in this example, as you see, the 3 and 7 vector are both going to the right, and we're going to consider it as positive. So it's positive and going to the right, so the vector ends up being 10 and to the right. And for the second example, we have a vector going to the right that's positive 10, and we have a vector going to the left. It's negative because it's going to the left of -3, and we get a resulting vector of 7 to the right. Just in case you might be wondering, oh, what does resultant mean, right? So we know that we can see the word result in the word resultant, and result means like consequence, effect, or like the outcome of something, right? So as we can assume, the resultant is something that happens due to, oh my God, sorry about the background noise. Something that happens as a result or consequence of something. Okay, so one way that we add vectors together is called the head to tail method. And in this method, well, as you can see, we put the tail of the additional vector at the end of the head of the previous vector. So we have two vectors here, A and B, and the resulting vector is C, right? So C is from the beginning at the tail of vector A, and it ends at the head of vector B. The resultant vector is the vector drawn from the tail, as you can see. Yeah, basically what I just said. So next is the Pythagorean theorem, which I think many of you guys might already know if you learned it in school. But in any case, this is a pretty important theorem that we need to learn in physics. And it's basically like a mathematical law that we learned from a Greek philosopher, Pythagoras. And he developed this idea that in a right triangle, the square of A plus the square of B would equal the square of C. And we can use that in a lot of vector problems, and as a result, like a lot in physics. So if two vectors A and B form a 90-degree angle, which is right here, we can use the Pythagorean theorem to find the magnitude of the resultant vector C, which is right here. So yeah, as you can see, the magnitude of the sum of the vectors A plus B equals C is A squared plus B squared, which equals to C squared. So here I have an example question for everyone. So Jim walks 4 miles north. Oh my God, no. Yeah, 4 miles north. And then walks 3 miles east. What was the resultant distance if he had walked a straight line from the starting point to the end point? So I'm gonna give you guys like a minute and put down in the chat or what your guesses are. Oh my God, sorry. All right, well, that is time, and I'll go over the problem now. So in this problem, we go over two vectors. One is when he walked to the north, and 1 when he walked to the east. So we can add together these vectors to find the resultant, which is from the start to the end, right? This would be, I think, 3, and this would be 4, right? So using Pythagorean's theorem, we can find out that the resultant would be 5. Yeah. So next, I'm going to go over like a couple basic math laws, just review again, because we need it for vectors and physics. So A plus B is equal to B plus C. I'm sure you've all seen this before. This is the commutative law for, and in this case for vector addition, which states that it does not matter in which order that vectors are added in. So if I added 1 plus 3, that's 4, right? But if I added 3 plus 1, that's also 4. So it really doesn't matter which order we add things in, because the sum will still end up as the same. The associative law, you might also recall this in math class, that when you add 3 or more numbers together, it still does not matter which of them are added together first, even if you see parentheses. I know in math, you see parentheses and you're like, wow, I need to add these together first, right? So yes, that is true, but it also doesn't really matter due to the associative law. In addition, when you're only dealing with addition, that you can add them together, no matter, yeah. And so next is subtracting vectors. It's really similar to addition. When you subtract 2 vectors like A minus B, it is basically the same as adding the vectors A plus B, as you can see in this diagram. The resultant vectors of D and C, they would both have the same magnitude. Like, look how the distance from this point to this point and this point would be the same. However, the only difference would be the direction. And so next we have like a short 5-minute TED Talk video that we thought would be informative for you guys to listen to.
Physicists, air traffic controllers, and video game creators all have at least one thing in common: vectors. What exactly are they, and why do they matter? To answer, we first need to understand scalars. A scalar is a quantity with magnitude. It tells us how much of something there is. The distance between you and a bench and the volume and temperature of the beverage in your cup are all described by scalars. Vector quantities also have a magnitude, plus an extra piece of information: direction. To navigate to your bench, you need to know how far away it is and in what direction, not just the distance, but the displacement. What makes vectors special and useful in all sorts of fields is that they don't change based on perspective, but remain invariant to the coordinate system. What does that mean? Let's say you and a friend are moving your tent. You stand on opposite sides, so you're facing in opposite directions. Your friend moves 2 steps to the right and 3 steps forward, while you move 2 steps to the left and 3 steps back. But even though it seems like you're moving differently, you both end up moving the same distance in the same direction, following the same vector. No matter which way you face or what coordinate system you place over the campground, the vector doesn't change. Let's use the familiar Cartesian coordinate system with its x and y axes. We call these 2 directions our coordinate basis because they're used to describe everything we graph. Let's say the tent starts at the origin and ends up over here at point B. The straight arrow connecting the 2 points is the vector from the origin to B. When your friend thinks about where he has to move, it can be written mathematically as 2x plus 3y, or like this, which is called an array. Since you're facing the other way, your coordinate basis points in opposite directions, which we can call x prime and y prime. And your movement can be written like this, or with this array. If we look at the two arrays, they're clearly not the same. But an array alone doesn't completely describe a vector. Each needs a basis to give it context, and when we properly assign them, we see that they are in fact describing the same vector. You can think of elements in the array as individual letters. Just as a sequence of letters only becomes a word in the context of a particular language, an array acquires meaning as a vector when assigned a coordinate basis. And just as different words in two languages can convey the same idea, different representations from two bases can describe the same vector. The vector is the essence of what's being communicated, regardless of the language used to describe it. It turns out that scalars also share this coordinate invariance property. In fact, all quantities with this property are members of a group called tensors. Various types of tensors contain different amounts of information. Does that mean there's something that can convey more information than vectors? Absolutely. Say you're designing a video game and you want to realistically model how water behaves. Even if you have forces acting in the same direction with the same magnitude, depending on how they're oriented, you might see waves or whirls. When force, a vector, is combined with another vector that provides orientation, we have the physical quantity called stress, which is an example of a second-order tensor. These tensors are also used outside of video games for all sorts of purposes, including scientific simulations, car designs, and brain imaging. Scalars, vectors, and the tensor family present us with a relatively simple way of making sense of complex ideas and interactions, and as such, they're a prime example of the elegance, beauty, and fundamental usefulness of mathematics.
Well, that is. Thank you for coming, I guess. This is the end of the presentation, and these are our sources. Yeah, that's physics.
Yeah, thank you, physics, and thank you, Naomi, for the great lesson. Do you guys have any questions? Feel free to speak out or type them in the chat. If not, you are feel free to leave.
Bye-bye. See you next week.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you so much. Bye. Have a great
Thank you.
day.
Bye.
Anshu, wait, after you finish your passage, you can just send the Gmail to me.
Okay.